In the dim flicker of an oil lamp somewhere in the year 476 AD, a boy no older than 14 slipped a jeweled crown from the head of the last Roman emperor in the West and packed it into a velvet-lined box bound for Constantinople. The boy's name was Odoacer, a barbarian chieftain who had just ended a dynasty that had ruled for 5 centuries. He did not smash the crown or melt it down. He sent it east with a polite note, as if returning a borrowed item. Rome, the city that had once made the Mediterranean its private lake, was no longer an empire. It was a memory. And yet the fall did not happen in that single moment. It began centuries earlier, with one quiet decision that seemed harmless at the time, a decision so subtle that even the senators who made it went home to their villas and slept soundly. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and the world outside your window fades, let us travel back to the year 212 AD to a palace on the Palatine Hill, where a young emperor named Caracalla signed a document that would, over the slow grind of generations, hollow out the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Close your eyes. Breathe in the scent of cedar smoke and distant sea salt. We are walking the marble corridors of power, and the mistake is already being made. Caracalla was 24, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked carved rather than born. His father, Septimius Severus, had clawed his way to the purple from the African province of Leptis Magna, and Caracalla had inherited both the throne and the paranoia. He had already murdered his brother Geta in their mother's arms to secure sole rule. Blood still stained the palace rugs when he turned his attention to a problem that had nagged emperors for decades: taxes. The empire was vast, stretching from the damp forests of Britain to the sun-blasted dunes of Syria, but only a fraction of its people paid the full weight of Roman citizenship taxes. Slaves, freedmen, provincials, they all lived under Roman law, fought in Roman wars, and died on Roman roads, yet most were not cives Romani, not citizens. They paid local dues, but the central treasury in Rome hungered for more. Caracalla needed money for his legions, for the donatives that kept the Praetorian Guard loyal, for the bread and circuses that kept the Roman mob quiet. And so, on a spring morning when the Tiber ran high with mountain snowmelt, he gathered his council and proposed something radical: make everyone a citizen. Every soul from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. One empire, one law, one tax roll. The senators blinked. Some smiled. A few older men remembered the social war 2 centuries earlier, when Italian allies had bled for the privilege of citizenship and finally won it. This was different. This was universal. The decree was drafted, sealed, and copies were sent by imperial post to every province. Papyrus scrolls unrolled in dusty municipia, in frontier forts, in desert oases. The Antonine Constitution, they called it. A gift, Caracalla said. Equality at last, but gifts have prices. The ink was barely dry when the first cracks appeared. Citizenship had always been Rome's golden ticket, a status that elevated a man above the masses, gave him the right to appeal to Caesar, to own property without fear, to marry across tribal lines. Now it was handed out like bread at a funeral game. A Syrian merchant in Antioch woke up a Roman. A Celtic farmer in Gaul found his children eligible for the legions. A Berber camel driver in Numidia could now sue a Roman magistrate. The empire swelled with new Romans overnight, millions of them, and the treasury rejoiced. Tax revenue spiked. Caracalla threw donatives to the army, built baths, and marched north to fight Germans. He died 4 years later, stabbed by a bodyguard on a roadside near Carrhae, but the edict lived on. And here is where the poison began to work, slow and sweet, like honey laced with lead. Citizenship without assimilation is a hollow shell. Rome had always grown by folding conquered peoples into its culture, teaching them Latin, giving them baths and aqueducts, turning Gauls into toga-wearing magistrates who quoted Virgil. But Caracalla's gift skipped the hard part. It declared everyone Roman without making them Roman. Local languages persisted. Tribal gods kept their temples. A man in Egypt might pay his taxes in Roman coin, but still mummify his dead and worship Serapis. The empire became a mosaic of cultures united only by paperwork. Imagine the scene in a frontier town, say Vindolanda on Hadrian's Wall, where the mist clings to the heather and the soldiers stamp their feet against the cold. A centurion named Titus Flavius, born in Italy, drills his men. Half are auxiliaries, Britons with blue tattoos and long mustaches, now suddenly citizens. They speak Celtic among themselves, grumble about the food, and dream of the day their 25 years are up and they can go home to their roundhouses. Titus tries to enforce discipline, but the old hierarchy is crumbling. These new citizens have rights. They can complain. They can appeal. And worst of all, they can leave the army and take their pensions with them. Pensions that now must be paid to millions more. The treasury groans. Emperors who follow Caracalla, men like Elagabalus and Severus Alexander, scramble to keep the system afloat. They debase the silver denarius, shaving the edges, mixing in copper until the coins look bruised. Inflation creeps in like fog. A loaf of bread that cost 1 sestertius in Caracalla's day costs 4 under Gallienus 50 years later. Merchants hoard goods. Farmers bury their grain rather than sell at a loss. The cities, those glittering hubs of Roman life, begin to empty as people flee to the countryside where taxes are harder to collect. But the real rot is in the legions. Rome's army had been the hammer that forged the empire. Professional, disciplined, loyal to the state. Recruited from citizens, paid in silver, granted land on retirement. Now citizenship is everywhere, but the pool of willing recruits shrinks. Why join the legions for 25 years of mud and blood when you can stay home, farm your plot, and still call yourself Roman? The emperors turn to the frontiers, to the very barbarians they once fought. Goths, Alemanni, Franks, men who crossed the Rhine or Danube not as invaders but as hired muscle. They are given Roman uniforms, Roman pay, Roman oaths. They learn a few Latin commands, enough to take orders, but their hearts remain with their tribes. A generation passes. The legions fill with men who speak broken Latin, who tattoo their faces, who pray to Wotan before battle. The old Roman core thins to a sliver. By the time of Constantine in the early 4th century, the army is a patchwork of federates, allies who fight for Rome but owe no love to Rome, and the treasury, the treasury. To pay these mercenaries, emperors seize land, demand taxes in kind, quarter troops on civilians. The middle class, the equestrians and decurions who once ran the cities, are crushed between the tax collector and the soldier. They abandon their curial duties, flee to the church, or simply disappear into the forests. Let your breathing slow now. Picture the empire as a vast body, arteries clogged with the cholesterol of easy citizenship. The heart still beats in Constantinople, the new Rome that Constantine builds on the bones of Byzantium, but the limbs are failing. In the west, the provinces drift. Spain, Gaul, Africa, they pay lip service to the emperor, but govern themselves through local strongmen, Gothic kings, Frankish counts. The roads crack. Aqueducts leak. The great baths of Rome stand empty, their pipes stolen for scrap. And still the mistake compounds. Every emperor since Caracalla has inherited the problem and made it worse. Diocletian tries to freeze the economy, binding farmers to the land, artisans to their guilds, but the chains chafe. Constantine embraces Christianity, hoping a new faith will bind the empire. But the old gods linger in the countryside, and the new faith splinters into Arian and Nicene, east and west arguing over the nature of Christ while barbarians gather at the gates. We are only a century past Caracalla now, and the symptoms are clear to anyone who looks, but no one looks. The senators in Constantinople wear silk and argue about theology. The generals in Milan count their federates and hope for the best. And in the villas of Gaul, a new kind of Roman is born, men who speak Latin with a Gallic accent, who hunt boar in the forests their grandfathers cleared, who pay taxes to a distant emperor they have never seen. They are Roman, yes, but not the Rome of Scipio or Trajan. They are Roman in name only. The fatal mistake was not the granting of citizenship. It was the failure to demand anything in return. Rome gave the world its law, its language, its roads. But in 212 AD, it stopped asking the world to become Roman. It settled for tribute instead of transformation. And tribute, unlike loyalty, can always be withheld. As the night deepens and your thoughts begin to drift, let us follow one family through the long decay. In the year 250 AD, a potter named Lucius lives in Lugdunum, modern Lyon. He is a new citizen, proud of his status. His children enrolled in the local school where they learn rhetoric and the 12 tables. His taxes are heavy, but he pays. His son joins the legions, serves in Britain, retires with a plot of land near the Moselle. That son, Marcus, farms wheat and vines, speaks Latin to his wife, but Celtic to his workers. His taxes are heavier still, and the coins he receives in payment are mostly copper. Marcus's son, Flavius, sees the legions filled with Germans. Hears the emperor is a boy in distant Ravenna. and decides the army is no place for a Roman. He stays on the land, marries a Frankish girl, learns her language. Flavius's son Clovis is born in 410 AD, the year Alaric sacks Rome. Clovis speaks no Latin at all. He is baptized a Christian, but his gods are the old ones of the forest. He becomes a king, not an emperor, and his people are Franks, not Romans. The chain is broken. 4 generations from citizenship to oblivion. The empire does not fall in a single crash. It leaks away year by year, like sand through a cracked hourglass. The mistake of 212 AD is the crack. Everything else, the barbarian invasions, the economic collapse, the loss of the West, flows from it. Rome survives in the East for another 1,000 years, but that is a different story, a Greek story, not a Roman one. Tonight, as you slip towards sleep, hold this image. A boy packing a crown into a box, sending it east because the West no longer has need of emperors. The fatal mistake was made long before Odoacer was born, in a palace on a hill, by a young man who thought he was giving a gift. He was opening a door, and through that door walked the end of the world. The Tiber still flows beneath the 7 hills, but by the time the sun rises on the morning after Odoacer's messenger departs with the crown, the city of Rome is already a ghost wearing its own corpse. The great forums are knee-deep in silt and thistle. The Colosseum hosts more goats than spectators. Senators who once debated the fate of provinces now haggle over the price of turnips. And yet, if you walk the Via Sacra at dusk, you can still hear the echo of marble sandals, the ghost whisper of a million ambitions that built aqueducts across mountains and laws across centuries. The mistake of 212 AD is no longer a decree on papyrus. It is the air everyone breathes, thick with the dust of what was lost. Tonight, let the hush of that dust settle over you like a blanket. We are going deeper now, into the arteries of the empire, to watch how a single decision metastasizes through the body politic until the limbs forget they ever belonged to the same creature. Close your eyes. Smell the resin of pine torches guttering in a provincial courthouse. We are in the year 238 AD, 26 years after Caracalla, and the first open wound has appeared. The place is Thystris, a sun-bleached town in the African province, modern Tunisia, where olive groves stretch silver green to the horizon and the amphitheater can seat 30,000. The tax collector has come again, a thin man from Carthage with wax tablets and a bodyguard of Syrian archers. The local farmers, new citizens all, owe the annona, the grain tax that feeds Rome and its armies. But the harvest failed. Locusts stripped the trees. The collector does not care. He seizes livestock, then children, then the farmers themselves to be sold in the market at Carthage. Word spreads. A knot of old men, veterans of the African legions, remember the days when citizenship meant protection, not predation. They arm themselves with pruning hooks and hunting spears. They march on the collector's villa. The Syrian archers loose a volley, but there are too many farmers. The collector's head ends on a pike. The veterans proclaim a new emperor, an 80-year-old proconsul named Gordian, because he is rich, kind, and conveniently nearby. Messengers ride north to Rome. The Senate, terrified of the Praetorians who murdered the last 2 emperors in a single year, votes to recognize Gordian and his son. For one brief moment, the empire holds its breath. Then the Praetorians march south, crush the rebellion, and nail the Gordians' heads to the Milvian Bridge. The year of the 6 emperors begins. 6 men will wear the purple in 238 AD, and 5 will die violently. The mistake of Caracalla has created a world where citizenship is universal but loyalty is negotiable. Every province now believes it can make an emperor. Africa tried. So will Gaul, Syria, even tiny Moesia. The army, swollen with new citizen recruits who feel no bond to the distant capital, sells the throne to the highest bidder. A Thracian peasant named Maximinus Thrax, the first emperor never to set foot in Rome, squeezes the provinces until they bleed. He doubles taxes, seizes temple treasures, melts down statues of the gods. The landowners of Africa revolt again, and this time the revolt spreads to Italy. Senators who once applauded Caracalla's generosity now curse his memory. They raise 2 of their own, Pupinus and Balbinus, gray-haired aristocrats who promise a return to the old ways. The Roman mob, hungry and furious, riots for a third, a boy named Gordian III, grandson of the first rebel. The Praetorians murder Pupinus and Balbinus in their baths. Gordian III, 13 years old, rules alone for 6 years, until he too is murdered on the Persian frontier. The empire staggers, but it does not fall, not yet. The center holds, barely, because the provinces still need the idea of Rome, the roads, the coinage, the law. But the idea is thinning, like parchment left in the sun. Let us linger in Africa, where the olive trees still bear fruit and the memory of the revolt festers. The great estates, the latifundia, worked by slaves and colony, tenant farmers bound to the soil, produce the oil that lights Roman lamps from Britain to Egypt. The owners are new citizens, descended from Punic merchants and Berber chieftains, men who speak Latin in the forum and Punic in the home. They pay taxes, but they also hide grain, bribe officials, and dream of the days when Carthage ruled the seas. When the tax collector comes, they pay in promises. When the legions come, they pay in sons. But the sons who march away to fight Persians or Germans come home changed, if they come home at all. They bring back stories of emperors who die in months, of pay that arrives late and in clipped coins, of officers who speak Greek or Gothic. The African landowners begin to wonder, why send grain to a Rome that cannot protect them? Why send sons to an army that cannot win? They begin to store grain in underground silos, to train their own guards, to mint their own bronze tokens for local trade. The empire is still there, but it is becoming optional. Northward now, across the wine-dark sea, to the rolling hills of Aquitania in southwestern Gaul. The year is 260 AD. The Emperor Valerian has just been captured by the Persians, the first Roman emperor to suffer such humiliation. His son Gallienus rules from Milan, too busy fighting Alemanni to notice that the Rhine frontier has collapsed. A general named Postumus, born in the Batavian Islands, sees his chance. He proclaims himself Emperor of the Gauls, and the provinces of Gaul, Spain, and Britain flock to him. They are tired of sending taxes to a Rome that cannot defend them. Postumus sets up his capital in Cologne, mints coins with his own bearded face, and builds a senate of Gallic nobles. For 15 years, the Gallic Empire thrives. Its legions are local men. Its taxes stay local. Its gods are a comfortable mix of Mars and Celtic Epona. The mistake of 212 AD is visible here in its purest form. Citizenship without central loyalty creates splinter states. Postumus is not a barbarian. He is a Roman citizen, educated in the classics, but his Rome is the Rhine, not the Tiber. When Gallienus finally marches west to reclaim the provinces, his army deserts. The Gallic Empire falls not to Roman arms, but to its own internal rot, and the provinces drift back to the center. But the precedent is set. Any general with a legion can be emperor anywhere. As your mind softens toward sleep, picture the empire as a tapestry, threads of red and gold stretching from Hadrian's Wall to the Atlas Mountains. Caracalla's edict pulled one crucial thread, the thread of cultural cohesion, and now the pattern phrase. In the east, the Syrian sun beats down on Palmyra, where a widow named Zenobia rules in the name of her young son, Vabalithus. She is a new citizen, descended from Arab kings, fluent in Greek, Latin, and Aramaic. Her husband, Odenathus, held the Persian frontier for Rome, earning the title Corrector of the East. When he dies, Zenobia takes the reins. She conquers Egypt, Arabia, most of Anatolia. Her coins show her as Augusta, her son is Augustus. For a moment in 270 AD, the empire has three heads: Gallienus in Milan, Postumus in Cologne, Zenobia in Palmyra. Rome is a name, not a place. Aurelian, a hard-eyed Illyrian soldier, reunites the empire by force. He crushes Postumus's successors, starves Palmyra into submission, leads Zenobia in golden chains through Rome. But the chains are symbolic. The idea of secession has taken root. Every province now knows it can survive without Rome, at least for a while. The economy buckles under the weight of universal citizenship. The Annona, once a steady flow of Egyptian wheat and African oil, becomes a trickle. Emperors demand payment in kind because coin is worthless. Farmers hide their crops. Cities shrink. Londinium, once a bustling port of 20,000, becomes a riverside village. The great public buildings, the basilicas and thermae, fall into disrepair. The middle class, the curiales who maintain them, are bankrupt. Diocletian, rising in 284 AD, tries to staple the empire together with iron laws. He fixes prices, binds workers to their trades, divides the empire into dioceses and prefectures. He creates the Tetrarchy, 4 emperors to rule a realm too vast for one. But the Tetrarchy is a machine that requires perfect synchronization, and men are not gears. Constantine discards it, moves the capital to his new city on the Bosphorus, and baptizes the empire in the waters of Christianity. The mistake of Caracalla haunts even this new faith. The church, once a persecuted sect, becomes the empire's new glue, but it is a glue that hardens into factions. Bishops argue over the Trinity while Huns gather on the Danube. Let us follow a single coin, a silver denarius minted in Caracalla's reign, bright and heavy with 80% silver. It buys a soldier's daily bread in 212 AD. By 238 AD, under Maximinus, it is clipped and worn. 60% silver buys half a loaf. By 270 AD, under Aurelian, it is a bronze washer with a silver wash, buys a cup of watered wine. By 300 AD, under Diocletian, it is one of 1,000 identical bronze tokens, buys nothing. The coin passes through 100 hands: a legionary in Britain, a merchant in Antioch, a tax collector in Africa, a prostitute in Rome. Each owner trusts it less. Barter returns: a chicken for a haircut, a jug of oil for a pair of sandals. The empire's lifeblood, trust in the central authority, drains away. The mistake was not just cultural, it was economic. Citizenship without contribution bankrupted the state. In the quiet of your room, let the weight of centuries settle. The fatal mistake was a slow poison, not a sudden blow. It turned citizens into taxpayers, taxpayers into subjects, subjects into strangers. Rome did not fall because of barbarians. The barbarians were invited in to fill the vacuum left by Romans who no longer wished to be Roman. The legions became mercenary bands. The provinces became kingdoms. The city of Rome became a museum. And the crown, that jeweled symbol of universal rule, traveled east to a city that spoke Greek and called itself Roman, but was something else entirely. Tonight, as sleep claims you, hold the image of that coin, tarnished and clipped, passing from hand to hand until no one remembers what it was meant to buy. The Bosphorus glitters under a moon as thin as a clipped denarius. And in the year 324 AD, the city of Byzantium is already dying to be reborn. Constantine stands on the promontory where Europe kisses Asia, his cloak snapping in the salt wind, and decides that Rome must move. Not the Rome of marble and blood, but the Rome of power, of tax rolls, of the last illusion that one man can rule the world. He has spent the night in prayer, or so the court historians will claim, beside a pagan shrine to Tyche, the goddess of fortune, and in the morning he drives a spear into the earth and traces the boundaries of his new Rome. The old senators in the West grumble, but they are ghosts now, their villas crumbling, their authority reduced to parchment grants no one enforces. Constantine does not ask permission. He commands, and in this command, the mistake of 212 AD mutates into something colder, more durable, an empire that no longer pretends to be Roman in spirit, only in name. Tonight, let the lap of black water against the sea walls lull you. We are walking the half-built colonnades of Constantinople, where Greek is spoken in the markets and Latin in the barracks, and the fatal crack widens into a chasm no bridge can span. Constantine's city rises fast. He strips the provinces of statues, columns, artisans. The bronze horses that once pranced above the Circus Maximus now rear over a hippodrome yet to be paved. The porphyry column of Theodosius will come later, but already the scaffolding climbs. Egyptian granite, Phrygian marble, Syrian cedar. Everything is looted from the old empire to dress the new. The West bleeds art the way it once bled silver. Ravenna, Milan, Trier, they keep their governors and their legions, but the heart has moved east. The Senate in Rome still meets, still passes decrees, but the decrees are read aloud in Greek in the new Senate House on the Augustan. Latin becomes the language of soldiers and lawyers, Greek the language of poets and bishops. The cultural glue that Caracalla failed to demand is now actively discarded. Constantine baptizes his city in the name of Christ, but the Christ he chooses is the Christ of the East. Icon heavy, incense thick, argued over in councils that sound more like philosophy seminars than prayer. The West clings to its simpler rites, its Latin psalms, its bread and wine simplicity. The empire is one on paper, two in soul. Follow the Via Egnatia westward from the Golden Horn, past the land wall still rising under Thracian masons, and you reach the rolling plains where the Goths have settled as foederati. They came as refugees in 376 AD, 50 years after Constantine's death, fleeing Huns who rode like the wind across the steppe. The Emperor Valens, busy fighting Persians, let them cross the Danube on condition they surrender their weapons and give hostages. They crossed with wagons and cattle, old men and infants, a nation on the move. But the Roman officials at the river, new citizens themselves, corrupt and hungry, sold them rotten grain, demanded gold for water, enslaved the children they were meant to protect. The Goths kept their weapons after all. In 378 AD, at Adrianople, they shattered a Roman army and killed Valens himself. The battle is remembered as a catastrophe, but it is only a symptom. The mistake of 212 AD made the Goth citizens in theory long before they crossed the river. It also made Roman officials careless with the lives of fellow citizens, who spoke a different tongue and worshipped in wooden churches. Adrianople is what happens when citizenship is a tax bracket, not a shared destiny. The West feels the tremor first. In 406 AD, the Rhine freezes solid, something the old Romans would have taken as an omen. Vandals, Suevi, Alans, a swirl of tribes pushed by Huns, cross the ice near Mogontiacum. The frontier legions, underpaid and undermanned, melt away. The invaders pour into Gaul, then Spain, then Africa. By 439 AD, the Vandals sail from Carthage and make the Mediterranean their lake again, the way it was before Scipio burned their fleet. They are not barbarians in the old sense. Their king Gaiseric wears silk, mince coins with Latin inscriptions, negotiates treaties and flawless rhetoric. He is a Roman citizen, technically by the Edict of Caracalla, but his Rome is the sea and the grain fleet. He sacks the old Rome in 455 AD, not with fire and sword, but with disciplined looting. 2 weeks of systematic plunder, carting off the treasures Constantine left behind. The bronze roof tiles of the Pantheon are pried loose and melted into Vandal belt buckles. The West is not conquered. It is foreclosed. In the villas of Gaul, the last Roman landowners sit by dying hearths and write letters no one will answer. One such man, Sidonius Apollinaris, Bishop of Clermont, pens elegant verses about the old days while Visigothic tax collectors wait outside. He is a new citizen's grandson, fluent in Latin, steeped in Virgil, but the Visigoths who rule Aquitania now demand tribute in wine and horses, not poetry. Sidonius negotiates, flatters, survives. His letters are a time capsule, the last flicker of Roman literacy in a world sliding into dialect and rune. The schools close, the baths cool, the roads, those marvels of engineering, become cattle tracks. The mistake of 212 AD stripped the West of the cultural immune system that once turned Gauls into Romans. Without it, the provinces do not resist the newcomers. They absorb them, and are absorbed. The Visigoths settle in Toulouse, then Toledo, and issue law codes in Latin for their Roman subjects and Germanic customs for their warriors. 2 peoples, 1 kingdom, no empire. Eastward, the machine still grinds. Constantinople's golden domes catch the sunrise, and the Emperor Justinian dreams of reconquest. It is 527 AD, and the fatal mistake is now 3 centuries old, calcified into bureaucracy. Justinian is a Latin-speaking Thracian who marries a dancer named Theodora and decides to glue the empire back together with law and war. He sends Belisarius, a general with a private army funded by his wife's estates, to retake Africa from the Vandals. Belisarius lands with 15,000 men, mostly Hunnic and Slavic mercenaries, and in a single campaign ends a kingdom that lasted 90 years. Then Italy. The Ostrogoths under Theodoric had ruled from Ravenna with a light hand, preserving aqueducts, senators, even the Latin language. Belisarius shatters them in a 20-year war that leaves Italy a desert. Rome changes hands 5 times. Its population falls from hundreds of thousands to a few thousand shepherds. The Senate meets for the last time in 603 AD, a handful of old men in patched togas, and then not at all. Justinian's lawyers compile the Corpus Juris Civilis, the most perfect expression of Roman law ever written. But the law now governs an empire that ends at the Adriatic. The West is gone, not lost in battle, but abandoned by the center that no longer needs it. Let the scent of myrrh and candle wax drift through your thoughts. In the great palace of Constantinople, eunuchs whisper in corridors paneled with ivory, and the emperor counts the cost of glory. The plague arrives in 541 AD, shipped in Egyptian grain, and kills 1/3 of the population. Taxes fall. Armies shrink. The Balkans fill with Slavs who settle quietly, farm the abandoned villas, forget the Latin names of the rivers. Justinian dies in 565 AD, his reconquests already slipping away. His successor Justin II goes mad and is wheeled around the palace in a golden chair, biting his servants. The mistake of Caracalla has become institutional sclerosis, an empire that can still build the Hagia Sophia, that dome of heaven suspended on light, but cannot field an army without hiring Avars or Lombards who fight for pay, not Rome. In the west, the darkness is not complete. Monasteries rise among the ruins. Irish monks copy Virgil by candlelight. Visigothic kings convert to Catholicism and dream of a new Roman order under their own crowns. But the center is gone. The Pope in Rome crowns no emperor now. He negotiates with Lombard dukes and sends missionaries to the Angles across the sea. The fatal mistake was never the barbarians. It was the moment Rome stopped requiring its citizens to become Roman and began requiring only that they pay. Payment can be withheld. Identity cannot. The West dissolves into kingdoms, Frankish, Visigothic, Lombard, each claiming the mantle of Rome but none able to wear it. The East endures Greek-speaking, icon-venerating bureaucratic to the bone, and calls itself Roman until the last cannonball shatters its walls in 1453. But that is another 1,000 years away. Tonight, as your pulse slows to the rhythm of distant waves, hold the image of a child in a half-ruined forum, chasing a hoop through weeds that grow between the flagstones where Cicero once spoke. The child speaks a dialect his great-grandfather would not recognize, but he knows the word Roman the way we know the word Atlantis. A story, a shine on old coins, a crown packed in a box and sent east because the West no longer had a head to wear it. The mistake was made in a palace sealed with wax, copied on papyrus, and carried by horse to the ends of the earth. It did not destroy the empire in a day. It taught the empire to destroy itself, one unassimilated citizen at a time. The year is 568 AD, and the Lombard iron is still hot from the forge when Alboin leads his people across the Julian Alps like a wolf pack scenting blood. They come down the old Roman roads their grandfathers once guarded as foederati, and find the gates of Italy hanging open on rusted hinges. Pavia falls in 3 days, Verona in a week. Milan, the imperial capital of the West for 2 centuries, empties before the Lombards even knock. The mistake of 212 AD has now aged into full senescence, an empire that granted citizenship to the world but forgot to teach the world how to defend itself. Tonight, let the clang of Lombard axes echo softly in your ears. We are riding with the war band through moonlit vineyards, past villas where the last Roman senators hide their daughters in wine cellars, and the West is learning a new name for itself. No longer provincia, but regnum. Breathe deep the scent of crushed grapes and distant smoke. Sleep is coming. But first we must watch the corpse of Rome be carved into kingdoms. Alboin is tall, red-bearded, with a torque of gold around his neck and a skull cup at his saddle, said to be the cranium of a Gepidic king he slew in single combat. His warriors wear scale mail looted from Byzantine armories, carry Spatha swords forged in Roman factories, and speak a Germanic tongue laced with Latin curses. They are not invaders from another world. They are the logical end of Caracalla's edict. Their fathers were citizens on paper, paid to guard the frontier, then unpaid, then unemployed when Constantinople stopped sending the Annona. Now they take what they were promised. They settle in the Po Valley, divide the land by spearcast, and leave the Roman population to till the soil as colony, half-free tenants who pay 1/3 of their harvest to a Lombard duke who cannot read the tax ledger but can count sheep. The cities shrink behind their walls. Aquileia, once a port of 50,000, becomes a fishing village. The amphitheaters fill with nettles. The Lombards build wooden halls on the ruins of basilicas, roast oxen where senators once reclined, and drink from silver chalices melted down from cathedral patens. Southward, in Rome itself, the Pope Gregory, later called the Great, writes letters by candlelight while the Tiber floods the lower forums. He is a Roman of the old blood, educated in the classics, but his Latin is already medieval, thick with ecclesiastical jargon. The emperor in Constantinople is Maurice, a Cappadocian who taxes Egypt to pay Slavs to fight Avars. Rome is a Byzantine duchy now, governed by an exarch in Ravenna who hasn't seen the city in years. Gregory negotiates with Lombard dukes the way a shepherd negotiates with wolves, with grain, gold, and prayers. He buys the freedom of captives, ransoms nuns, sends missionaries to the Anglo-Saxons across the sea. He is the first pope to act like a secular ruler because there is no one else. The mistake of 212 AD stripped the West of its administrative class. The curiales fled, the senators died out, and the church inherited the vacuum. Gregory's letters are a lament. The aqueducts leak, the granaries are empty, the walls crumble. He repairs what he can with alms from pilgrims who still believe Rome is eternal. But eternity is measured in bread now, not marble. Cross the Alps into Frankish Gaul, where the Merovingian kings rule from wooden palaces scented with mead and dog. Clovis, baptized in 496 AD, founded a dynasty that claims Roman legitimacy, but his great-grandsons divide the kingdom like a pie. Neustria, Austrasia, Burgundy, names that overlay the old provinces like scar tissue. The Frankish nobles are bilingual, Latin for charters, Frankish for war cries. They marry Roman heiresses, inherit Gallo-Roman villas, and let the hippocausts go cold because firewood is cheaper than olive oil. The great estates of Aquitania still produce wine, but the amphorae are stamped with Christian crosses now, not imperial eagles. The tax system is gone. The king lives on his own domains in the loot of war. The mistake of Caracalla echoes in the silence of the Forum, where once Decurions argued over sewer repairs. Now Frankish counts hunt stag through the colonnades. The cities are islands, Paris, Orleans, Tours, surrounded by forest that creeps back year by year. The roads are rivers now. Goods move by barge on the Loire, the Rhine, the Rhone. Rome's arteries have clogged. And the body politic survives on local blood. In Visigothic Spain, the sun bakes the Meseta where Leovigild rules from Toledo. He is the first king to mint gold tremises with his own face, not the Byzantine emperors. His son Recared converts from Arianism to Catholicism in 589 AD, uniting the Gothic nobility with the Hispano-Roman bishops in a single faith. The Third Council of Toledo is a triumph. Gothic dukes in bearskins swear fidelity to a Nicene creed drafted by Roman clerics in polished Latin. But the unity is skin deep. The Jews are persecuted, the Suevi in the northwest crushed, the Basques left to their mountains. The law code is a hybrid, Roman for property, Gothic for blood feuds. The mistake of 212 AD is visible in the cemeteries, Gothic warriors buried with swords beside Roman senators with eulogies in verse. Two cultures share a grave but not a future. The Visigoths will rule for another century, then fall to Arab horsemen from Africa in 711 AD, their kingdom too brittle to bend. Let your thoughts drift northward to the misty isles of Britain, where Rome's ghost lingers longest and fades fastest. The legions left in 410 AD and the civitates begged for help that never came. By 450 AD, Saxon keels ground on the eastern shores. The Britons, Roman citizens for 2 centuries, fight with patterned shields and Latin battle cries, but their cities burn. Gildas, a monk writing in the 540s, calls it the ruin of Britain. The walls breached, the villas torched. The people fled to Wales or Brittany or the slave markets of Ireland. Archaeology tells the quieter truth. Pottery styles change. Latin inscriptions cease. The bathhouses fill with dark earth. The mistake of Caracalla left Britain with citizenship but no army, taxes but no protection, roads but no one to repair them. The Anglo-Saxons settle as farmers, not conquerors, pushing the Britons west until Arthur, real or myth, makes a last stand at Baden Hill. By 600 AD, the island is 7 kingdoms: Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, each with its own king, its own dialect, its own forgetfulness of Rome. In the east, the empire, just barely still Roman, fights for breath. Heraclius, an Armenian general, seizes the throne in 610 AD and faces apocalypse. The Persians sack Jerusalem, carry off the true cross, burn the churches of Anatolia. The Avars and Slavs overrun the Balkans. Thessalonica is besieged yearly. Constantinople's population falls to a quarter, its granaries empty. Heraclius melts the church plate to pay his soldiers, then leads them east in a crusade before the word exists. He defeats the Persians at Nineveh in 627 AD, restores the cross to Jerusalem, and returns to find the Arabs exploding out of the desert. In 636 AD at Yarmouk, a scratch Roman army faces the Muslim legions and is annihilated. Syria, Egypt, Africa, gone in a decade. The empire shrinks to Anatolia, Greece, a few islands. Greek becomes the official language in 620 AD. Latin is dead in the courts. The mistake of 212 AD has finally borne its bitterest fruit. An empire that included everyone but bound no one. The provinces that once paid taxes now pay jizya to caliphs who build on Roman foundations but dream in Arabic. Picture Heraclius on the walls of Constantinople, old before his time, watching the Arab fleet probe the Bosphorus. Behind him, the Hagia Sophia gleams, its mosaics veiled in whitewash to hide the faces during wartime austerity. The theme system is born, soldier farmers granted land in exchange for service, a desperate echo of the old Roman colonies. The empire will survive another 8 centuries as Byzantium, but the West is lost forever. The fatal mistake was not military, it was cultural abdication. Rome stopped Romanizing the world and started taxing it. When the taxes stopped, so did the loyalty. As sleep wraps its arms around you, hold the image of a Lombard girl in Pavia, blonde braids tied with Roman glass beads, learning to milk cows in the shadow of a triumphal arch. She is the future. The past is the Latin inscription at her feet, half buried in mud, unread by any passerby. The crown sent east in 476 AD still gleams in Constantinople, but the body it once ruled has been divided among kings who call themselves Roman only in dreams. The mistake was made in a palace, sealed with wax and carried to the ends of the earth. It did not kill the empire with a sword. It taught the empire to forget its own name. The bells of Constantinople toll at dawn in the year 717 AD, a bronze clamor that rolls across the Golden Horn and rattles the shutters of a city that has not slept for months. Arab armies encircle the land walls, their tents a white sea from the Marmara to the Theodosian fortifications. Inside, the Emperor Leo III, born in Germanicia, raised on the Syrian frontier, a man who speaks Greek with a guttural accent, walks the battlements in a plain cloak, counting catapults and praying to a god who has already saved the city once with fire. The Arabs have come with siege towers, with Greek-speaking engineers, with the confidence of a faith that swept from Mecca to the Indus in less than a century. They expect the gates to open the way Damascus did, the way Alexandria did. They do not expect the mistake of 212 AD to save Rome one last time, in the form of a weapon no papyrus edict ever envisioned, Greek fire. Tonight, let the hiss of that liquid flame lick the edges of your dreams. We are standing on the sea walls as the siphons belch incandescent death, and the West, already a patchwork of barbarian kingdoms, watches from afar, unaware that its ghost still fights on the Bosphorus. Greek fire is a state secret, guarded like the true cross, a syrup of pine resin, naphtha, quicklime, pumped through bronze tubes onto wooden hulls. It burns on water, it clings to flesh. The Arab chroniclers call it the fire that swims. Leo's navy, galleys crewed by Anatolian themes, rowed by Slavs settled in Thrace, sails out under cover of darkness and turns the Arab fleet into a pyre. For 760 days the siege drags on, through plague and winter and starvation. The Bulgars, pagan cousins of the Slavs, ride to the city's aid and crush the Arab land forces in the marshes of Thrace. When the survivors limp home to Syria in 718 AD, they leave behind 80,000 dead and the certainty that Constantinople is unconquerable. The empire is reduced to a rump, Anatolia, the Aegean, a sliver of Italy, but it lives. The mistake of Caracalla granted citizenship to Syrians who now fight under green banners, but it also granted it to the Isaurian mountaineers who distill the fire that saves the city. Rome survives by no longer being Roman. Westward, the silence is deeper. In 701 AD, a Berber general named Tariq crosses from Africa with 12,000 men, mostly converts to Islam, many of them former Roman citizens of Mauritania. They land at the rock that still bears his name, Jebel Tariq, Gibraltar. The Visigothic kingdom of Spain is rotten with civil war. King Roderick marches south with an army of slaves and nobles who hate him. At the Guadalete River, the Visigoths break and flee. Toledo falls without a fight. In 8 years, the entire peninsula is Muslim, except the Cantabrian mountains, where a handful of Christian nobles lick their wounds. The Umayyad governor in Cordoba builds on Roman aqueducts, plants Roman olives, and mints gold dinars with Latin inscriptions for the first decade because the local craftsmen know no Arabic. The mistake of 212 AD is complete here. The provincials who once paid taxes to Ravenna now pay jizya to Damascus, and the transition feels like changing landlords, not changing worlds. The Great Mosque of Cordoba will rise on the site of a Visigothic church that was built on a Roman temple, layer upon layer of conquest, each claiming the same citizenship in a different tongue. In the Frankish north, a mayor of the palace named Charles Martel watches the Muslim tide with cold blue eyes. He is the bastard son of Pippin of Herstal, raised in the stables of Austrasia, a man who fights with a Francisca axe and rules through sheer competence. The Merovingian kings are long-haired shadows, locked in their palaces while the mayors do the work. In 732 AD, an Umayyad raiding army crosses the Pyrenees, sacks Bordeaux, burns the Basilica of Saint-Hilaire in Poitiers. Charles gathers the Frankish levy, farmers with spears, nobles with mail shirts, and meets the Muslims between Poitiers and Tours. The battle is not the world-saving clash of legend. It is a week of skirmishes, of Frankish shield walls holding against Arab cavalry. On the seventh day, Charles sends a flanking force into the Muslim camp, and the raiders flee south with their loot. The chroniclers call it the Battle of Tours, the hammer that stopped Islam. It is nothing of the sort. The Umayyads retreat because the raid was always a raid, not a conquest. But the myth grows. Charles earns the surname Martel, the hammer, and the Franks begin to dream of something larger than their muddy kingdoms. Let the scent of wet iron and horse sweat drift through your slowing thoughts. In the monastery of Lindisfarne, off the Northumbrian coast, a monk named Bede writes his ecclesiastical history of the English people by whale oil lamp. It is 731 AD, and he has never seen Rome, but he knows its calendar, its saints, its Latin psalms. The Anglo-Saxons, pagan pirates 3 generations ago, now send missionaries back to the Frisians and Saxons of the continent. Boniface, born in Devon, fells the sacred oak of Thor in Hesse and builds a chapel from its timbers. The mistake of 212 AD left Britain defenseless, but it also left the church as the only institution that still spans the old empire. From Iona to Ravenna, from Toledo to Constantinople, monks copy manuscripts, sing the same hours, and keep the idea of Rome alive in parchment and planchet. The kingdoms are many, but the church is one. And it is Latin southward again, in the heel of Italy. The Byzantine Duke of Naples pays tribute to the Lombard Duke of Benevento, while both send gifts to the Pope in Rome. The Exarchate of Ravenna clings to a corridor of land, from the Po to the Adriatic. Its capital a city of mosquitoes and memories. In 751 AD, the Lombard king Aistulf rides in and takes Ravenna without a siege. The exarch Eutychius flees to the lagoons where Venetian fishermen pole their boats through salt marshes. The Pope, Stephen II, looks east for help and sees nothing. Emperor Constantine IV is busy smashing icons and fighting Bulgars. Stephen crosses the Alps in winter, the first pope to do so, and kneels in the snow before Pippin the Short, Charles Martel's son, now mayor and soon to be king. Pippin, crowned by papal hands in 754 AD, marches into Italy twice, defeats Aistulf, and donates the captured lands to the Pope. The Papal States are born, a ribbon of territory from Rome to Ravenna, governed by the successor of Peter because no emperor remains to govern it. The mistake of Caracalla has come full circle. The Church, once a persecuted sect within the empire, now owns the empire's corpse. In Constantinople, the iconoclast storm rages. Leo III, the savior of 718, believes images of Christ weaken the army. Soldiers should fight for God, not wood and paint. He orders the mosaic of Christ above the chalky gate whitewashed. The monasteries revolt. Monks are flogged, nuns exiled. The controversy splits the empire the way Arianism once did, but now the battle is fought with ink and excommunications. In the West, the Pope condemns iconoclasm and drifts further from Byzantine orbit. The cultural fracture that began with Caracalla's edict, Latin West, Greek East, hardens into schism. The empire that survives is Greek Orthodox, bureaucratic. The West is Latin, Catholic, feudal. The mistake was never just administrative. It was the decision to include without assimilating, to tax without teaching, to rule without rooting. Picture a Frankish boy in the palace school at Aachen, decades later, learning his letters from an Irish monk who quotes Virgil. The boy's father is Charlemagne, crowned emperor on Christmas Day 800 AD by Pope Leo III in the old Basilica of St. Peter. The crown is not the one Odoacer sent east. It is a new one, Frankish iron under papal gold. The empire is reborn, but it is not Roman. It is Carolingian, a fusion of Frankish warbands, Roman law, and Christian liturgy. The mistake of 212 AD made this possible. By dissolving the old citizenship into meaningless universality, it left room for a new universalism under the cross. Charlemagne sends Missi Dominici to count pigs and hear complaints, builds palaces of stone where wooden halls once stood, forces the Saxons to baptize or die. His scribes copy the Corpus Juris Civilis beside the rule of Saint Benedict. The West is rising from the mud, but it rises as something else. As sleep pulls you under, hold the image of Greek fire blooming on black water, of a pope kneeling in snow, of a Frankish king lifting a sword that will carve a new empire from the bones of the old. The fatal mistake did not end Rome. It ended the need for Rome. The crown sent east in 476 AD still gleams in Byzantine treasuries, but the West has forged its own. The world Caracalla made was too large to hold together with law alone. It shattered, and from the shards grew kingdoms, caliphates, and a church that would outlast them all. Tonight, the bells of Constantinople fade into the wind, and the West sleeps under a different sky. The snow falls thick on Aachen in the winter of 800 AD, muffling the hammers of masons raising the palace chapel's octagon toward a heaven that feels closer than Rome ever did. Charlemagne stands beneath the half-finished dome, his breath clouding in the torchlight, and listens to Alcuin of York read aloud from the freshly copied Codex Amiatinus, a Bible so vast it takes 3 monks to lift it. The ink is still wet on the dedication page, Carolus Magnus, Imperator Romanorum. The words are Latin, the voice is Anglo-Saxon, the emperor is Frankish, and the empire is a deliberate echo of something lost. Tonight, let the scrape of quills on vellum and the low Latin chant of the palace clergy carry you across the centuries. We are in the scriptorium where the mistake of 212 AD is being rewritten, not undone, but transformed into a new universal citizenship, this time under Christ instead of Caesar. Close your eyes. Smell the iron gall ink and the beeswax candles. The Carolingian Renaissance is a fragile flame, but it burns where Rome's light went out. Alcuin, small and sharp-eyed, wears the black Benedictine habit and speaks with the lilt of Northumbria. He has crossed the sea at Charlemagne's summons, bringing Irish minuscules and a passion for correcting texts. Around him, monks from Italy, Spain, even Visigothic Septimania bend over sloping desks, copying Virgil beside the Gospels, Pliny beside the Psalms. The palace school is a crucible. Frankish nobles' sons stumble over declensions while Saxon converts learn the Pater Noster in Latin. Charlemagne himself, towering and gray-bearded, sits in on lessons when campaigns allow, his finger tracing the Carolingian minuscule that will standardize writing from the Elbe to the Ebro. The mistake of Caracalla left the West illiterate in its own laws. Charlemagne demands literacy as the new citizenship. Every count must keep written accounts. Every Mrs. Dominicus carries a capitulary sealed with the emperor's monogram. The empire is held together by parchment now, not legions. And the parchment is in Latin because Latin is the church's tongue. And the church is the only institution that survived the fall. Southward, in the heel of Italy, the Lombard Duchy of Benevento still resists. Prince Grimoald III pays lip service to Charlemagne but mints his own gold solidi and marries a Byzantine princess to keep options open. The mistake of 212 AD lingers in the bilingual charters. Latin for the Roman townsfolk, Greek for the Byzantine garrisons, Lombard runic scratches for the hill clans. Charlemagne sends his son Pippin with a Frankish army in 788 AD, takes Salerno, forces Grimoald to shave his beard in submission. But the conquest is paper-thin. The moment the Franks march north, the Lombards sharpen their spears again. The West is a mosaic of loyalties too small for one emperor to glue together with mere coronation. Charlemagne's empire stretches from Barcelona to the Elbe, but it is a personal empire, held by the force of one man's will and the memory of his victories. When he dies in 814 AD, the snow that covers his grave will also cover the cracks. Let us ride east with the Missi Dominici. 2 men, 1 count, 1 bishop, traveling the old Roman roads now rutted and overgrown. They carry wax-sealed capitularies. No one may sell armor to Slavs. Every free man must attend the spring muster. Widows' dowries are protected by law. They stop at monasteries to inspect the polyptics, lists of tenants, oxen, vineyards, and hear complaints against local lords. In Saxony, the Widukind rebellion still smolders. Charred stakes mark where rebels were burned alive for clinging to the Irminsul. The Missi enforce baptism with the same zeal Rome once enforced tax collection. The mistake of Caracalla made citizenship a burden. Charlemagne makes Christianity the new citizenship, and the penalty for refusal is death or exile. The Saxon Wars last 30 years, longer than any Roman campaign, because the Saxons fight for their gods in their forests, and the Franks fight for a universal Christ who speaks Latin. When the last Saxon nobles kneel in the Ochre River, The empire claims another province, but the cost is a generation of widows and a landscape of ash. In the scriptorium at Tours, the monk Audouin copies the rule of Saint Benedict beside a Frankish law code. The ink is black, the margins decorated with interlaced beasts that owe more to Celtic knots than Roman acanthus. The Carolingian Renaissance is not a rebirth of classical Rome. It is a fusion. The architecture is Roman, basilicas with rounded apses, but the sculpture is barbarian, all swirling lines and staring eyes. The liturgy is Gregorian chant imported from Rome, but the hymns are in Old High German for the folk who cannot parse Latin. The mistake of 212 AD dissolved Roman identity into a tax roll. Charlemagne dissolves it into a prayer roll. The empire is Christian first, Roman second, Frankish third. The coronation in St. Peter's was a coup de théâtre. But the real coronation happens every Sunday, when a peasant in Frisia crosses himself at the name of Carolus Magnus. Picture the palace at Aachen on Easter Monday. 802 AD, embassies cluster in the atrium. Danes in wolfskin cloaks, Avars with gold torques. A Muslim envoy from Cordoba bearing a water clock that strikes the hours with silver balls. Charlemagne receives them seated on a throne salvaged from Ravenna, wearing a tunic of Tyrian purple that cost more than a village. The Muslim envoy, a Jew named Isaac, survives the journey back with tales of a Christian caliph who bathes in a marble pool and keeps a mechanical elephant in his garden. The elephant is a rumor, but the pool is real. Fed by hot springs the Romans once piped to their thermae. Charlemagne's court is a deliberate echo of Constantinople, but the echo is Frankish, mead instead of retsina, boar instead of peacock, Latin spoken with a guttural accent. The mistake of Caracalla made the empire too large to govern from one city. Charlemagne makes it too large to govern from one lifetime. Northward, in the marshes of the Elbe, the Obodrites and Wilsey raid the Saxon March. Charlemagne builds timber forts, settles Frankish colonists, grants land to monasteries that pray for his soul. The frontier is a bleeding edge where Latin meets Slavic, cross meets thunderbolt. Missionaries follow the armies, Anglo-Saxons to the Danes, Bavarians to the Carantanians. The church is the empire's nervous system, relaying orders in a language the sword cannot speak. But the church also keeps its own council. In 816 AD, Pope Stephen IV crosses the Alps to crown Louis the Pious, Charlemagne's only surviving son, in Reims. The oil is Roman, the cathedral is Frankish. The emperor is already balding at 38. The mistake of 212 AD left the papacy as the only Roman institution with continuity. Now the papacy anoints the emperor, not the other way around. The balance tips. Let the scent of wet wool and wood smoke settle over you. In the year 840 AD, Louis the Pious dies in a hunting lodge on an island in the Rhine, and the empire fractures like thin ice. His sons, Lothar, Louis the German, Charles the Bald, meet at Verdun in 843 AD, and carve the Carolingian realm into 3 kingdoms. Lothar keeps the imperial title and the middle strip from the North Sea to Provence, a corridor of cities and vineyards. Louis the German takes the east, the Germanic heartland. Charles the Bald takes the west, the old Neustria and Aquitania. The Treaty of Verdun is written in Latin, but the oaths are sworn in Old French and Old High German so that each army can understand. The mistake of Caracalla made the empire linguistically incoherent. The Carolingians made it politically incoherent. The Universal Empire lasts one generation past Charlemagne, then settles into the familiar pattern of kingdoms too proud to unite, too weak to stand alone. In the West, Charles the Bald builds palaces at Compiègne, marries a Saxon princess, and fights off Viking longships that sail up the Seine. In the East, Louis the German crushes Moravian dukes and dreams of Constantinople. In the middle, Lothar's sons squabble over Italy until the imperial title becomes a hollow crown passed from hand to hand. The Vikings are the new barbarians, but they are also the old story. Pagans filling the vacuum left by a citizenship that demanded nothing but taxes. They settle in Normandy, learn French, become Christians, and within a century will conquer England under a duke who still remembers the fjords. The mistake of 212 AD is a ghost that possesses every invader. Include them on paper, and they will include themselves with steel. As sleep deepens, hold the image of a Carolingian monk illuminating a manuscript with gold leaf, painting a miniature of Charlemagne crowned by the hand of God. The emperor's face is idealized, bearded and serene. but the hand that holds the quill trembles with fatigue. The empire was a miracle of one man's will, a brief flare of light in the dark centuries. The mistake of Caracalla taught the West that universality without culture is suicide. Charlemagne taught it that universality with culture is possible, but only for a lifetime. The snow that covers Aachen in 814 AD will melt, and the empire with it. But the books remain, the chant remains, the Latin liturgy remains, whispering Rome's name long after the legions are dust. The Seine runs black with Viking blood in the spring of 885 AD, and Paris, still a cluster of wooden houses on the Ile de la Cité, shivers under the siege of 700 longships. Count Odo, son of Robert the Strong, stands on the timber bridge his father built, mailcoat rusted with rain, and watches the Northmen drag their boats past the walls to attack from the rear. The mistake of 212 AD has now shrunk to a single island, a bishop's prayer, and a handful of Frankish knights who remember Charlemagne's name the way children remember fairy tales. Tonight, let the slap of oars on cold water and the low Latin chant from the Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés carry you into the heart of a kingdom that is no longer an empire. Close your eyes. Smell the smoke of burning thatch and the sour reek of unburied corpses. We are in the West Francia of Charles the Fat, where the Carolingian dream has curdled into feudal nightmares, and the only thing universal is the fear of the sea. Charles the Fat, emperor in name, obese and epileptic in body, arrives too late with an army too small. He buys the Vikings off with 700 pounds of silver and permission to ravage Burgundy instead. The Parisians, who held the bridge for a year with boiling oil and prayer, spit on his banner as he rides away. Odo is hailed as a hero, and when Charles dies in 888 AD, the nobles of the West crown Odo king in Compiègne. The Carolingian line stumbles on in the east, but in the west it is finished. The mistake of Caracalla made the empire too large to defend. The Treaty of Verdun made it too small to matter. The West is now a patchwork of counties and duchies, Normandy, Flanders, Anjou, Toulouse, each ruled by a count who builds a stone tower and calls it sovereignty. The king is first among equals, and equals are never equal for long. Southward, in the sun-bleached hills of Provence, the Saracens have built a nest at Fraxinatum, a pirate fortress from which they raid the Alpine passes and carry off pilgrims to sell in Córdoba. The local counts pay tribute in honey and slaves. The roads that once carried Roman legions now carry Muslim slavers, and the monasteries that once copied Virgil now copy ransom demands. The mistake of 212 AD left the provinces defenseless. The Carolingian collapse left them leaderless. The church tries to fill the gap. In 909 AD, William the Pious, Duke of Aquitania, founds the Abbey of Cluny with a charter that frees it from all lay control. Cluny becomes a beacon, black-robed monks chanting the hours, reforming lax houses, sending out abbots like missionaries. By 1000 AD, 300 Cluniac priories dot the West, a spiritual empire held together by prayer where steel failed. The mistake was cultural abdication. The Church's answer is cultural reassertion: one God, one Latin liturgy, one moral order. In the east, the Ottonian dynasty rises from the Saxon March. Henry the Fowler, son of a duke, is elected king in 919 AD by nobles who fear the Magyars more than they love the Carolingians. He builds burgs, fortified towns where peasants flee when the horse archers come, and beats the Hungarians at Ried in 933 AD. His son Otto Themer, crowned in Charlemagne's chapel at Aachen, crushes the Slavs on the Elbe and the Magyars at Lechfeld in 955 AD. The battle is a massacre. Magyar arrows bounce off Saxon shields, and the captives are hanged from trees as a warning. Otto is crowned emperor in Rome in 962 AD by Pope John the Thene, a debauched teenager who needs protection from his own barons. The Ottonian Empire is smaller than Charlemagne's, centered on Saxony and Bavaria, but it claims the same universal mantle. The mistake of 212 AD is now a distant memory, but its consequence is clear. The West can only be unified by a strong man with a strong sword, and the sword must be blessed by the Church. Let the scent of linden blossoms and horse sweat drift through your thoughts. In the year 1000 AD, the world does not end, despite the sermons, but it does change. The population is rising. Forests are cleared. Three-field rotation spreads from the monasteries. The heavy plow with iron share bites deeper into the clay of Champagne, and wheat yields climb. The local lord who once lived on his own domain now demands labor service from his peasants, who grumble but obey because the alternative is starvation or the forest. The castle, motte and bailey at first, then stone donjons, becomes the center of life. The Count of Anjou, Fulk Nera, builds 13 in his lifetime, black towers that loom over the Loire like warnings. The mistake of Caracalla dissolved central authority. Feudalism is the scar tissue that grows in its place. The king is a distant figure who sends tax collectors once a year. The lord is the man who can hang you from his oak. In Italy, the peninsula is a chaos of cities and kingdoms. The Byzantine Catapan in Bari rules the south with Greek-speaking officials and Arab mercenaries. The Lombard princes of Salerno and Capua play east against west. In the north, the March of Ivrea becomes the mark of Tuscany under the Canossa family. Matilda of Tuscany, born in 1046 AD, will rule half of Italy with a rod of iron and a heart of prayer, kneeling barefoot in the snow to reconcile emperor and pope. But in 1000 AD, the cities are stirring. Venice, safe in her lagoons, sends galleys to the Levant and brings back silk and spices. Pavia, Verona, Lucca, once Roman municipia, elect their own bishops and build walls against the local count. The mistake of 212 AD left the cities without imperial protection. Now they protect themselves with charters and commerce. The commune is born, citizens swearing oaths to each other, not to a distant emperor. Picture a merchant in Pavia, weighing pepper on bronze scales while his wife embroiders a cope for the cathedral. He pays the bishop for protection, the count for the market toll, the emperor nothing at all. The emperor is Otto III, a boy of 16 who dreams of renovating Rome. He rides south in 999 AD with an army of Saxons and a head full of Byzantine ceremonial. He opens Charlemagne's tomb in Aachen, takes the cross from the dead emperor's neck, and declares himself Romanorum Imperator. In Rome, he builds a palace on the Palatine and fills it with Greek eunuchs and Latin poets. The Romans, now a ragged town of 20,000, laugh behind their hands. The mistake of 212 AD made the empire a name. Otto III tries to make it a costume. He dies at 21, poisoned or heartbroken, and is buried in the chapel at Aachen beside the grandfather he never met. Northward, in the fjords of Norway, Olaf Tryggvason returns from England with English silver and English priests. He is baptized in the Scilly Isles, dreams of a Christian Scandinavia, and forces his people to the font with the same zeal Charlemagne showed the Saxons. The Thingmen, free farmers who once voted on laws under the open sky, now vote with their feet, fleeing to Iceland or kneeling to the cross. The mistake of 212 AD was forced inclusion without consent. The Christianization of the North is forced inclusion with consent extracted at sword point. The sagas will remember Olaf as a saint and a tyrant, and the stave churches will rise with dragon heads still carved on the roof beams, a compromise between Thor and Christ. In the east, the Byzantine Empire under Basil II, called the Bulgar Slayer, reaches its apogee. He blinds 15,000 Bulgarian captives after the Battle of Cleidion in 1014 AD, leaving one eye in every 100th man to lead the rest home. The Bulgarians submit, and the empire stretches from the Danube to the Taurus. Basil never marries, sleeps on the floor, and dies in 1025 AD with his boots on, planning a reconquest of Sicily. The mistake of 212 AD is invisible here. The empire is Greek, Orthodox, and mercilessly centralized. The themes still provide soldier farmers. The tagmata still guard the capital. The gold nomisma still buys loyalty from Armenians to Varangians. The West looks east with envy and fear, sending pilgrims to Jerusalem and mercenaries to Constantinople. As sleep wraps its arms around you, hold the image of a Cluniac monk walking the cloister at midnight, his sandals slapping on stone worn smooth by 1,000 years of prayer. The bell tolls for matins, and the sound carries across the dark fields where peasants dream of bread and lords dream of war. The mistake of Caracalla taught the West that citizenship without culture is death. The Church taught it that culture without power is prayer. The feudal world is the uneasy marriage of both. 1,000 local lords, one universal church, and a memory of Rome that flickers like a candle in the wind. The empire is gone, but the idea of empire is not. It will rise again, in different shapes, under different crowns, but always with the same fatal question. How do you make one people out of many without asking what one means? The year is 1066 AD, and the wind off the channel smells of salt and iron as William, bastard Duke of Normandy, steps onto the deck of the Mora, his flagship gifted by a wife who embroidered conquest on linen. Below decks, horses stamp in slings, knights finger their mail, and a priest mutters psalms against the storm that delays the crossing. Across the water, Harold Godwinson, Earl King, Oathbreaker in Norman eyes, stands on the cliffs of Sussex with a housecarl shield wall that remembers Hastings as a deer park, not a graveyard. The mistake of 212 AD has now distilled into a single day, a single battle, where the last echo of Roman citizenship will be hammered into the English soil by a Norman lance. Tonight, let the creak of oars and the flap of the papal banner lull you. We are sailing with the invaders under a sky heavy with omen, and the West is about to learn a new meaning for the word conquest. William is 38, scarred from a lifetime of border wars, fluent in the French that descended from Latin but would puzzle a Roman. His army is 10,000 strong, Norman knights hungry for land, Breton archers, Flemish mercenaries paid in silver from Rouen mint. They carry conical helmets with nasal guards, kite-shaped shields painted with dragons and crosses, and a papal bull that declares Harold a perjurer. The mistake of Caracalla granted citizenship to Bretons and Flemings who now fight for a duke who claims England by right of a promise extracted under duress. Harold's army is the feared, free men obliged to 40 days' service, and the housecarls, professionals with two-handed axes. They have marched from Stamford Bridge in the north, where Harold crushed another invader, Harold Hardrada, in a battle as bloody as any Roman triumph. The English are tired, but they are on home ground, shields locked on Senlac Hill, the forest at their back. The battle begins at 9 in the morning with a rain of arrows that darkens the sky. Norman cavalry charges uphill, lances lowered, but the shield wall holds like offshore rocks. Hours grind by. Feigned retreats draw the English down the slope, where Norman knights wheel and cut them to pieces. By late afternoon, Harold takes an arrow in the eye, legend says, and the housecarls die around his standard. The ferd breaks. William rides over the bodies to claim the crown that will make him conqueror. The mistake of 212 AD left England Roman for 4 centuries, but never fully Romanized. The Anglo-Saxons forgot the legions, and now the Normans will teach them a new feudal lesson. Within 5 years, the harrying of the north leaves Yorkshire a wasteland, villages burned, cattle slaughtered, survivors eating rats. Domesday Book, compiled in 1086 AD, is a tax roll more ruthless than any Roman census. Every pig, every plow, every hide of land recorded so the new lords know what they own. In Normandy, the conquest is a promotion. William returns to Rouen crowned and richer, his bastards legitimized, his dukes upgraded to earls. The mistake of Caracalla made land the reward for service. William makes England the reward for loyalty. The old English thens are dispossessed unless they swear fealty in French. Stone keeps rise where wooden halls stood, Tower of London, Colchester, Warwick, symbols of a conquest that will not be reversed. The church is Normanized too. Lanfranc, Italian abbot of Bec, becomes Archbishop of Canterbury and replaces Saxon bishops with continental clerics who speak Latin without an Anglo-Saxon accent. The mistake of 212 AD dissolved cultural identity. The Norman conquest dissolves national identity. England becomes a bilingual kingdom, French for the court, Latin for the church, English for the plow. Southward, in the sun-scorched plains of Apulia, another Norman is carving a kingdom from Byzantine and Lombard bones. Robert Guiscard, nicknamed the Crafty, lands in Italy with 5 knights and a dream in 1047 AD. By 1071 AD, he takes Bari, the last Byzantine stronghold in the south, and founds the Kingdom of Sicily. His brother Roger storms Messina in 1061 AD, crosses to the island, and in 30 years turns Muslim Sicily into a Christian realm where Arabic poets write in Greek. Norman knights marry Saracen heiresses, and the palace chapel in Palermo gleams with mosaics that rival Constantinople. The mistake of 212 AD is invisible here. The Normans are the new Romans, assimilating as they conquer, demanding Latin rites from Greek priests, feudal service from Arab emirs. Roger II, crowned in 1130 AD, wears a mantle embroidered with Arabic tigers and rules a court trilingual in Latin, Greek, and Arabic. The West is learning that conquest can build, not just destroy, but only when the conquerors demand cultural submission. Let the scent of myrrh and candle wax drift through your thoughts. In Cluny, the greatest church in Christendom rises, 5 aisles, a chevet of radiating chapels, a nave longer than old St. Peter's. Abbot Hugh, saintly and tireless, oversees a monastery that owns 1,000 priories and dictates morals to kings. The Peace of God movement spreads from Cluniac councils. No war on Sundays, no harming of peasants or clergy. The truce of God binding knights to 40 days of peace a year. The mistake of 212 AD left the West lawless. The church imposes law with bell, book, and excommunication. Knights who violate the peace are forced to walk barefoot to Jerusalem, carrying their armor like a penitent's burden. The pilgrimage becomes epidemic. Roads fill with palmers. Hospices spring up, the Via Francigena paved with alms. In the east, the Byzantine Empire cracks at Manzikert in 1071 AD. Emperor Romanos III Diogenes leads a glittering army against the Seljuk Turks and is betrayed by his own generals. Captured, ransomed, blinded, he dies in exile on an island monastery. The Turks pour into Anatolia, the empire's heartland, and the theme system collapses. Constantinople appeals to the West. Pope Urban II, a Cluniac reformer, preaches at Clermont in 1095 AD. Deus vult. The crowd roars and the First Crusade is born. Franks, Normans, Lotharingians, 20,000 strong, march east under Godfrey of Bouillon and Bohemond, son of Guiscard. They take Antioch after a siege of starvation, Jerusalem after a massacre that dyes the streets red. The Crusader states are feudal kingdoms grafted onto Levantine soil, Norman law in Edessa, French customs in Tripoli. The mistake of 212 AD made the East foreign to the West. The Crusades make it familiar, if only through blood. Picture a knight in the county of Edessa, his surcoat white with a red cross, dictating a charter to a Syrian scribe who writes in Latin and Arabic. The castle is Frankish stone, the bathhouse is Arab, the chapel is Romanesque. Intermarriage begins. Norman barons take Armenian wives, learn to eat pilaf, tolerate the Greek rite. The mistake of Caracalla failed because it demanded taxes without culture. The Crusades succeed briefly because they demand culture without taxes. But the success is fragile. Saladin, Kurdish vizier of Egypt, unites the Muslim world and retakes Jerusalem in 1187 AD. The horns of Hattin echo with Frankish screams as the true cross is lost, and King Guy imprisoned in Damascus. The West responds with the Third Crusade, Richard Lionheart, Philip Augustus, Frederick Barbarossa, but the reconquest stalls at Acre. The mistake of 212 AD taught division. The Crusades teach that even holy war cannot unify the West for long. In the north, the Hanseatic towns rise along the Baltic, Lübeck, Hamburg, Riga, merchant guilds that build walls and fleets, trade amber for cloth, and elect their own councils. The mistake of 212 AD left the cities independent. The communes of the 11th century make independence profitable. In Florence, wool merchants found banks, lent to kings, and commissioned Giotto to paint their chapels. The mistake evolves. Citizenship is no longer Roman or feudal. It is civic, sworn in the piazza under a guild banner. The podesta is hired from another city to avoid faction. The council meets in a palace built by taxes on wine and salt. As sleep deepens, hold the image of a Norman scribe in Palermo, illuminating a manuscript with gold and azure. Painting Roger II crowned by Christ like a Byzantine emperor. The king's face is stern, the crown is jeweled, the robe is Arabic. The West is a cauldron now. Norman steel, Cluniac prayer, merchant gold, Crusader zeal, boiling over the edges of the old Roman world. The mistake of 212 AD scattered the seeds of citizenship. The 11th century waters them with blood and ambition. The empire is dead, but its children are everywhere, speaking a dozen tongues, swearing 100 oaths, and all of them, knight, monk, merchant, carry a fragment of Rome in their saddlebags. Their psalters, their ledgers. The fatal mistake did not end the story. It began a new one, written in a language Rome never knew. The bells of Florence toll for Vespers on All Saints' Day, 1215 AD, and the Arno reflects a city that has outgrown its Roman walls like a boy outgrowing his tunic. Merchants in scarlet cloaks haggle over wool in the Mercato Vecchio, while bankers from the Peruzzi and Bardi. Families count florins stamped, with the lily in the baptistry doors that will one day bear Ghiberti's bronze paradise. The mistake of 212 AD has now flowered into 1,000 city-states, each jealous of its liberty, each claiming the ghost of Roman citizenship in charters sealed with wax and swagger. Tonight, Let the chime of those bells and the scent of wet stone after rain carry you into the communes of the high Middle Ages, where the empire's corpse is dissected by notaries and nourished by trade. Close your eyes. Hear the clop of mules on the Via Cassia and the low Latin of a guild meeting in the Palazzo Vecchio. We are in the Italy of Frederick II, where the last Hohenstaufen emperor tries to stitch the West back into one purple robe, and the cities answer with crossbows and excommunication. Frederick is 21 when he is crowned in Rome by Pope Honorius III, a Swabian with a Sicilian soul, raised in Palermo's trilingual court where Arab astrologers read the stars beside Greek physicians and Norman knights. He speaks 6 languages, keeps a menagerie of leopards, and writes a treatise on falconry that will outlast his empire. The mistake of Caracalla granted citizenship to Sicilians who now serve a German king. Frederick grants them taxes and law in return. He founds the University of Naples in 1224 AD, the first state university, free of papal control, where Roman law is taught beside Arabic mathematics. His constitutions of Melfi codify the Kingdom of Sicily into a centralized state, judges paid by the crown, sheriffs instead of feudal lords, taxes in gold augustales bearing his laureate head. The West has forgotten how to be governed from one center. Frederick remembers, and the barons hate him for it. Northward, in the damp fields of Flanders, the communes of Ghent, Bruges, and Ypres weave cloth that clothes kings from Lisbon to Novgorod. The mistake of 212 AD left the cities to fend for themselves. The 13th century makes them rich enough to buy kings. The Count of Flanders is a French vassal on paper, but the guilds elect their own aldermen, build belfries taller than cathedrals, and field armies of pikemen who can break a nightly charge. At Courtrai in 1302 AD, the golden spurs of French knights will litter the mud after Flemish weavers crush the flower of chivalry. The mistake evolves again. Citizenship is no longer blood or baptism. It is guild membership, sworn in the cloth hall under a banner of the lion or the bear. In Paris, the left bank teams with students who argue in Latin about universals and nominals. The University of Paris, chartered by Philip Augustus in 1200 AD, is a guild of masters who crown their rector with a biretta and defy the bishop when he tries to tax their wine. Peter Abelard is long dead, but his spirit haunts the cloisters where Thomas Aquinas will soon arrive from Sicily, carrying Aristotle in Arabic translation. The mistake of 212 AD dissolved Roman philosophy into silence. The scholastics resurrected in questions disputed over sour beer in the Rue du Fouar. The Church tries to control the explosion, condemns Aristotle in 1210 AD, then embraces him under Aquinas' pen. The West is learning to think again, and the thinking is dangerous. Let the scent of parchment and wood smoke settle over you. In the cathedral yards of Chartres and Reims, masons carve stone into lace, pointed arches, rib vaults, flying buttresses that lift the eye to heaven. The Gothic is born from Frankish forests and Arab geometry, paid for by Crusader loot and commune taxes. The mistake of 212 AD left the West without engineers. The Cistercians and the Templars become the new engineers, draining marshes, building granges, lending money at interest disguised as gifts. The Temple in Paris is a fortress bank where kings deposit crowns and pilgrims change florins for scrip. The mistake taught exclusion through indifference. The Church teaches inclusion through usury and excommunication. In the East, the Fourth Crusade sails from Venice in 1202 AD under a doge blind in one eye and sharp in both. The Crusaders vow to free Jerusalem, but detour to Zara, a Christian city, to pay Venetian debts. Then to Constantinople, where a puppet emperor promises gold and submission. The city falls in 1204 AD after a siege of fire and famine. The Crusaders sack the Queen of Cities. The bronze horses go to St. Mark's. The true cross is splintered. The library of the emperors burns. The Latin Empire of Constantinople lasts 60 years, a Frankish overlay on Greek bones, ruled by Baldwin of Flanders in the Blachernae Palace. The mistake of 212 AD made the East alien. The sack makes it enemy. Greek exiles found empires in Nicaea, Trebizond, Epirus, and wait for revenge. In 1261 AD, Michael VIII Palaiologos slips into the city with Genoese help and restores the Byzantine eagle. The West learns that conquest without assimilation is temporary. Picture a Pisan merchant in Constantinople before the sack, counting bezants in a warehouse by the Golden Horn, while his wife buys silk in the bazaar. He is a citizen of Pisa, proud of his commune's navy, his tower house in the Borgo, his vote in the Council of Elders. The mistake of 212 AD made citizenship local. The 13th century makes it profitable. Pisa fights Genoa for Sardinia, Venice fights everyone for the Levant, and the Mediterranean becomes a lake of Italian galleys. The compass, the astrolabe, double-entry bookkeeping, all arrive from Arab hands into Christian ledgers. The mistake evolves into capitalism. Citizenship is shares in a caravan, a vote in a compagnia, a tomb in Santa Croce paid for by pepper and alum. In England, Simon de Montfort summons the first parliament in 1265 AD after capturing Henry III at Lewes. 2 knights from each shire, 2 burgesses from each borough, sit with barons and bishops to grant taxes. The mistake of 212 AD left the provinces voiceless. The Magna Carta of 1215 AD and its successors give them a voice, however grudging. The king is no longer sacred. He is contractual. The mistake taught submission without representation. The English barons teach representation without submission. The commons will grow teeth, and one day bite the crown itself. Southward, in the kingdom of Sicily, Frederick II, excommunicated for the 4th time, launches a crusade without papal blessing in 1228 AD. He sails to Acre, negotiates with Sultan al-Kamil, Arabic spoken over wine, and recovers Jerusalem by treaty, not sword. Crowned king of Jerusalem in the Holy Sepulchre, he wears the crown of a city he will never rule. The Pope calls him Antichrist. The Arab chroniclers call him wonder of the world. The mistake of 212 AD made diplomacy impossible. Frederick makes it personal. He dies in 1250 AD wearing a Cistercian habit, his empire crumbling behind him. His bastard son Manfred fights on until Charles of Anjou beheads him at Benevento in 1266 AD. The Hohenstaufen dream dies, but the memory lingers in law codes and falconry manuals. In the north, the Teutonic Knights carve a state from Prussian paganism. They build brick castles along the Vistula, baptize with sword and fire, and create the Ordensland, a monkish empire where the Grand Master is Pope and Emperor in one. The mistake of 212 AD left the Baltic untouched. The 13th century Christianizes it with Baltic slaves and German merchants. The Hanse grows fat on timber and amber, and the cities of the League swear oaths to each other. Not to any king, as sleep pulls you deeper. Hold the image of a Florentine banker in his loggia, dictating a letter of credit to a scribe while his son practices fencing in the courtyard. The letter will travel to Bruges, change hands in London, fund a crusade or a cathedral. The mistake of Caracalla scattered citizenship into meaninglessness. The 13th century gathers it into guilds, communes, universities, parliaments. The West is no longer an empire. It is a civilization, polyphonous, argumentative, rich beyond Roman dreams. The fatal mistake did not kill Rome. It birthed 1,000 Romes, each smaller, each fiercer, each convinced it alone carries the true flame. The purple robe is cut into banners, and every city waves its own. The plague bells of Siena ring muffled through the fog of August 1348, and the city that once painted the Virgin on every wall now paints death in the streets. Bodies lie in heaps, smeared with the black boils that give the pestilence its name, while priests in wax-smeared robes shuffle from door to door with the last rites. The mistake of 212 AD has now ripened into a harvest of graves. A citizenship so universal that the same wind carries the same flea from the Golden Horn to the Orkneys. And no Roman law, no feudal oath, no guild charter can command the bacillus to stop at a border. Tonight, let the scent of vinegar and quicklime sting your nostrils as we walk the deserted loggias of Tuscany, past the unfinished frescoes of Ambrogio Lorenzetti, where good government lies half-painted and abandoned. Close your eyes. Hear the creak of the death carts and the low Latin of the Miserere, sung by survivors who no longer believe in tomorrow. The Black Death is the great equalizer, and the Empire's ghost finally learns what universal really means. It begins in Kaffa, a Genoese trading post on the Black Sea, where Mongol horsemen catapult infected corpses over the walls in 1346 AD. The Genoese flee in galleys that dock in Messina. Constantinople, Marseille, and the rats slip ashore with the cargo. By January 1348, the plague is in Florence. By March, in Paris. By June, in London. A third of Europe dies, 25 million souls, perhaps more. Villages empty. Fields lie fallow. The Arno runs red with the blood of the unburied. Boccaccio, holed up in a villa outside Florence, writes the Decameron for 10 young nobles who flee the city and tell tales to forget the stench. The mistake of Caracalla opened the world to Rome. The 14th century opens Rome's world to Yersinia Pestis. Trade routes that carried pepper and silk now carry death, and the citizenship that once meant taxes now means a shared grave. In Avignon, Pope Clement VI sits surrounded by braziers of burning juniper, buying up grain to feed the refugees who camp beneath the palace walls. He declares a jubilee for 1350 AD, promising plenary indulgences to any who reach Rome alive. Pilgrims drag themselves along the Via Francigena, kissing the relics of saints who failed to stop the pestilence. The mistake of 212 AD left the church as the only universal institution. The plague makes the church the only functioning government. Clement orders the Rhone to be consecrated so corpses can be dumped without sin. He survives, but half his cardinals do not. The papal court, already exiled from Rome since 1309 AD, becomes a city of ghosts and accountants, taxing the living to bury the dead. Northward, in the wool towns of Flanders, the weavers rise when the plague kills their lords. The Artevelde family in Ghent declares a republic, severs ties with France, and allies with England for the wool trade. The mistake of 212 AD dissolved central authority. The plague dissolves the last pretense of feudal loyalty. Jacques Bonhomme in France, Wat Tyler in England, the Ciompi in Florence. Artisans and peasants grab pitchforks and demand the same rights the guilds once reserved for masters. The Jacquerie of 1358 AD is put down with savage cruelty. Nobles ride through the countryside, hanging rebels from trees like ripe fruit. But the seed is planted. The mistake taught submission. The plague teaches that submission can be fatal. Let the scent of wet earth and lanolin drift through your thoughts. In England, the Statute of Labourers in 1351 AD tries to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, but the labor shortage makes every plowman a king. A serf who survives can demand double pay, move to the next manor, or buy his freedom with a single year's harvest. The mistake of 212 AD bound men to the soil through taxes. The plague unbinds them through death. Villenage crumbles. The yeoman rises. The commons in Parliament, strengthened by the plague's demographic gift, demand to audit the king's wars. Edward III, victorious at Crécy and Poitiers, pawns his crown to Flemish bankers to pay for the 100 Years' War that the plague interrupts but does not end. In the east, the Byzantine Empire, already a husk, loses its last Anatolian towns to Turkish beyliks. The plague kills the Varangian Guard in their barracks. The gold numisma is debased to Bilon. Emperor John VI Cantacuzene writes his memoirs by candlelight, blaming the catastrophe on divine wrath for the Hesychast controversy. The mistake of 212 AD made the East Greek an Orthodox. The plague makes it poor and desperate. Ottoman Turks crossed the Dardanelles in 1354 AD as mercenaries and stay as lords. Gallipoli falls and the road to Europe lies open. The West, bleeding from every pore, does not notice. Picture a Florentine banker named Giovanni Villani, chronicling the plague year by year until the boils take him in 1348 AD. His brother Matteo continues the work, counting the dead like florins in a ledger. 100,000 in Florence, 60,000 in Siena, half of Venice. The mistake of 212 AD made citizenship a number. The plague makes it a statistic. The banks survive. Bardi and Peruzzi collapse under the weight of English defaults, but the Medici are already rising, lending to popes and princes with interest disguised as gifts. The mistake evolves into finance. Citizenship is a bond, a letter of credit, a mortgage on the future. In the monasteries, the Cistercians and Benedictines die in choirs, their granges abandoned. The mistake of 212 AD left the church wealthy. The plague leaves it desperate for recruits. Flagellants march from town to town, whipping themselves bloody, blaming Jews, lepers, or the sins of the clergy. Pogroms sweep the Rhineland. Thousands are burned in their synagogues. The mistake taught inclusion on paper. The plague teaches exclusion in fire. The church condemns the flagellants, but the damage is done. Anti-clericalism festers beside the boils. Southward in the kingdom of Naples, Queen Joanna there rules a court of poets and poison. The plague kills her husband. She marries again and again, until her cousin Charles of Durazzo strangles her with a silken cord in 1382 AD. The mistake of 212 AD left the South feudal. The plague leaves it anarchic. Bandits rule the Abruzzi, condottieri sell their swords to the highest city, And the Papal Schism of 1378 AD splits the West into two obediences. Clement VII in Avignon, Urban VI in Rome. Kings choose popes the way they choose wines, and the Church's universal citizenship fractures into national churches. In the north, the Hanseatic League tightens its grip on the Baltic. Lübeck, Hamburg, Danzig, cities that survived the plague by closing their gates, now dictate terms to Denmark and Norway. The mistake of 212 AD left trade local. The plague makes it essential. Grain from Prussia feeds the wool towns of Flanders. Salt from Lüneburg preserves the herring fleets of Scania. Citizenship is a Hansa mark stamped on a barrel, a safe conduct through the sound. Let the rhythm of a death cart's wheels lull you. In the scriptoria that remain, monks copy the Danse Macabre. Skeletons leading popes, emperors, merchants, peasants in a chain that mocks all hierarchy. The mistake of 212 AD promised equality through law. The plague delivers it through death. The frescoes in the Camposanto of Pisa show the triumph of death. Nobles hunting, then suddenly confronted by coffins and angels with scythes. The message is clear. The citizenship that mattered was never Roman, never feudal, never civic. It was mortal. As sleep claims you, hold the image of a child in Orvieto, playing with a wooden knight among the abandoned market stalls. The plague has taken his parents, but the city will adopt him, teach him the wool trade, send him to Avignon with a purse of florins. The mistake of Caracalla scattered the empire into 1,000 fragments. The plague scatters the fragments into 1,000 opportunities. The West that emerges from the graves is poorer, harder, freer. Serfdom wanes, wages rise, cities rebuild with wider streets and higher taxes. The fatal mistake did not end with the fall of Rome. It ended with the fall of half of Europe. And from the charnel pits grows a new citizenship, one earned by survival, paid in labor, and sealed in the ledgers of the living. The empire is dead. Long live the contract. The cannon smoke drifts across the walls of Constantinople on the morning of May 29, 1453, and the last Roman emperor, Constantine V Palaiologos, stands in the breach of the Blachernay quarter with a sword in one hand and a cross in the other. His purple cloak is torn, his Greek is the tongue of Homer, and his empire is a city of 30,000 souls ringed by 200,000 Ottoman Turks. The mistake of 212 AD has now come home to the city that inherited Rome's crown. A citizenship so universal that the defenders include Genoese mercenaries, Catalan sailors, and Greek monks who pray in the Hagia Sophia, while Mehmet II's Janissaries chant the name of Allah. Tonight, let the boom of the great bombard urban and the thin Greek chant of the Kyrie Eleison carry you to the final wall. Close your eyes, smell the gunpowder and the incense. We are in the last hours of the Eastern Rome, where the fatal mistake is measured in cracked stone and spilled blood. Mehmet is 21, educated by Italian humanists, fluent in 5 languages, and obsessed with the dream of being the new Alexander. His cannon, cast by a Hungarian renegade, fires stone balls the size of wine vats, and after 53 days the outer walls are rubble. The defenders chain the Golden Horn with a boom, but the Turks drag their ships overland on greased logs to outflank it. On the final night, the moon turns blood red in eclipse, and the Greeks remember the prophecy. The city falls when the moon wanes. Constantine refuses to flee. He removes the imperial insignia, fights as a common soldier, and dies beneath the walls. The city is sacked for 3 days. The Hagia Sophia becomes a mosque. The bronze statues are melted for cannon. The libraries burn. The last Roman emperor's head is displayed on a pillar in the Augustion. The mistake of 212 AD granted citizenship to the ancestors of the Janissaries who now raise the crescent over the double-headed eagle. Westward, the news travels slowly, by Genoese galley to Venice, by Venetian courier to Rome. Pope Nicholas V weeps, calls for a crusade that never comes. The West is busy with its own wars. The 100 Years' War ends in 1453 AD with the French victory at Castillon, the first battle decided by cannon. The mistake of 212 AD left the West fragmented. The Gunpowder Revolution fragments it further. Kings who once needed nobles to raise armies now buy artillery and hire Swiss pikemen. The feudal levy becomes obsolete. The mistake evolves into absolutism. Citizenship is no longer land or guild. It is obedience to a monarch who commands standing armies paid in taxes. In Florence, the Medici Bank funds the papal crusade that never sails. Lorenzo the Magnificent, not yet 30, rules the city through charm and gold, patron to Botticelli and Michelangelo. The mistake of 212 AD made citizenship civic. The Renaissance makes it aesthetic. Humanists rediscover Greek manuscripts brought west by refugees from Constantinople, Plato, Aristotle, Ptolemy, and print them on Gutenberg's press, invented in Mainz around 1440 AD. The mistake taught ignorance through neglect. The printing press teaches knowledge through proliferation. A single Bible once cost a year's wages. Now a pamphlet costs a day's. Citizenship becomes literacy, and literacy becomes power. Let the scent of printer's ink and wet vellum drift through your thoughts. In Rome, Pope Sixtus IV builds the Sistine Chapel and sells indulgences to fund it. The mistake of 212 AD left the Church universal. The Renaissance popes make it Italian. The Papal States are a kingdom now, governed by nephews and mercenaries. The Borgias will soon poison their way to power. But in 1471 AD, the scandal is the Pazzi conspiracy in Florence. A banking family tries to murder Lorenzo in the cathedral during High Mass. The archbishop swings the censer with one hand and stabs with the other. Lorenzo survives. The Pazzi are hanged from the Palazzo Vecchio windows. The mistake taught inclusion without loyalty. The Italian cities teach loyalty without inclusion. Northward, in the Low Countries, Charles the Bold dreams of a middle kingdom from the North Sea to the Alps. He marries Margaret of York, buys cannon from Liège, and fights the Swiss at Morat in 1476 AD. The Swiss pikemen, peasant communes armed with 18-foot spears, shatter his knights and leave his body in the mud, stripped and gnawed by wolves. The mistake of 212 AD left the provinces independent. The Swiss Confederation makes independence permanent. 8 cantons swear oaths in the Rutli meadow, govern themselves by diet, and hire out their sons as mercenaries to every king in Europe. Citizenship is a halberd and a vote in the Landsgemeinde. In Spain, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile marry in 1469 AD and begin the slow unification of the peninsula. The mistake of 212 AD left Iberia divided. The Catholic monarchs make it one by marriage, war, and inquisition. Granada falls in 1492 AD after a siege paid for by Jewish loans that will soon be repaid with expulsion. Columbus sails west in the same year, paid by the same queen, and the mistake evolves into empire. Citizenship is no longer European, it is global. The Spanish crown grants encomiendas in the Americas, where Aztec and Inca gold flows back to Seville, and the natives are declared subjects of the crown, but not citizens in any meaningful sense. The mistake repeats on a vaster scale. Picture a German monk named Martin. Luther nailing 95 theses to the door of Wittenberg Castle Church in 1517 AD. The mistake of 212 AD made the Church the only universal citizenship. The Reformation makes it optional. The printing press spreads the theses across the Holy Roman Empire in weeks. Princes who resent papal taxes seize the moment. Saxony, Hesse, Brandenburg protect the reformers and confiscate monasteries. The mistake taught submission to Rome. The Reformation teaches submission to conscience or to the local prince. The Peasants' War of 1525 AD sees 12 articles demanding gospel freedom and the end of serfdom. Luther calls for their suppression, and the princes oblige with fire and sword. Citizenship fractures into confessions: Catholic, Lutheran, Calvinist, each with its own citizenship test. In France, Francis Rooster builds Fontainebleau and fights Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, for control of Italy. The mistake of 212 AD left the West polycentric. The Italian wars make it dynastic. The Battle of Pavia in 1525 AD sees the French king captured by imperial landsknechts, and the ransom bankrupts the treasury. The mistake evolves into balance of power. No single monarch can dominate Europe, and the citizenship that matters is allegiance to a dynasty that speaks French, Spanish, or German. In England, Henry VIII breaks with Rome in 1534 AD to marry Anne Boleyn and seize the monasteries. The mistake of 212 AD left the Church supreme. The English Reformation makes the king supreme in both church and state. The dissolution enriches the crown and creates a new gentry who buy abbey lands and build prodigy houses with Tudor brick. Citizenship is now national. To be English is to swear the oath of supremacy, and to refuse is to be drawn and quartered at Tyburn. In the east, the Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent reaches its zenith. He takes Belgrade in 1521 AD, Rhodes in 1522 AD, and crushes the Hungarians at Mohacs in 1526 AD. Vienna is besieged in 1529 AD but holds. The mistake of 212 AD granted citizenship to the ancestors of the Janissaries. Suleiman grants them Hungary as a vassal kingdom. The millet system allows Christians and Jews to govern themselves under their own laws, paying jizya for the privilege. Citizenship is confessional, not cultural. And the empire endures because it demands taxes, not assimilation. As sleep deepens, hold the image of a Flemish mapmaker named Gerard Mercator, bending over a table in Duisburg, drawing the world on a projection that will bear his name. The year is 1569 AD and the seas are open. Portuguese caravels round the Cape, Spanish galleons cross the Pacific, English privateers raid the Main. The mistake of Caracalla made the world Roman. The age of discovery makes it European. Citizenship is a passport stamped in Lisbon or Seville, a license to trade in Goa or Mexico, a grant of land in Virginia where the natives are declared subjects but not citizens. The fatal mistake did not end in 476 AD or 1453 AD. It began a chain reaction that scattered Roman seeds across oceans, where they grew into empires that spoke Spanish. Portuguese, English, French, each claiming universality, each repeating the mistake in a new tongue. The crown that Odoacer sent east is now a constellation of crowns, and the citizenship that began as a tax roll ends as a world map. The year is 1789, and the Bastille falls to a Parisian mob on a July afternoon thick with gunpowder and the smell of baking bread. A printer named Camille Desmoulins leaps onto a café table in the Palais Royal, waves a pistol, and shouts that the king's troops are coming. The crowd surges toward the old fortress, drags out 7 bewildered prisoners, and beheads the governor on the steps. The mistake of 212 AD, citizenship granted as a bureaucratic flourish, without culture, without consent, without consequence, has now circled the globe and returned to the heart of the West, transformed into a single word that echoes from Paris to Philadelphia to Port-au-Prince: liberty. Tonight, let the crackle of muskets and the scratch of quills on the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen lull you into the final chapter. Close your eyes. Hear the tricolor flapping over the ruins of the Bastille and the low murmur of 1,000 pamphlets printed overnight. We are in the birth throes of the modern world, where the fatal mistake is finally corrected or shattered beyond repair. Across the Atlantic, the United States of America, born in 1776 with a declaration that all men are created equal, ratifies a constitution in 1787 that counts enslaved Africans as 3/5 of a citizen for taxation and representation. The mistake of 212 AD granted citizenship without assimilation. The American experiment grants it without equality. George Washington, in his second term, watches from Philadelphia as French agents stir Republican clubs in every port. The mistake evolves into ideology. Citizenship is no longer blood, faith, or land. It is belief in a piece of paper, and the paper can be argued over, amended, burned. In France, the Estates General meets in Versailles for the first time since 1614. The Third Estate, lawyers, merchants, doctors, declares itself the National Assembly on a tennis court and swears not to dissolve until France has a constitution. Louis XVI, descendant of the Sun King, locks the doors. The deputies move to a nearby hall and begin the work of turning subjects into citizens. The mistake of Caracalla made citizenship a gift from above. The revolution makes it a demand from below. The Declaration of Rights is printed in millions of copies, carried by post riders, read aloud in village squares. Article 1. Men are born and remain free and equal in rights. The Roman Empire took 4 centuries to grant citizenship to all free men within its borders. The French Republic grants it to every male in a single night, and then spends the next decade deciding who counts as a man. Let the scent of wet ink and candle smoke settle over you. In the Jacobin Club, Maximilien Robespierre, lawyer, incorruptible, pale as parchment, argues that virtue is the soul of the Republic and terror is its handmaiden. The guillotine rises in the Place de la Révolution, and the mistake of 212 AD is inverted. Citizenship is no longer inclusion without loyalty. It is loyalty without limit. Aristocrats, priests, moderates, even revolutionaries who hesitate. Thousands ride the tumbrils to the blade. The Roman Empire debased its coinage. The French Republic debases its citizenship, issuing certificates of civic virtue that expire with the dawn. The mistake taught passivity. The terror teaches paranoia. Across the Channel, Edmund Burke publishes Reflections on the Revolution in France in 1790, warning that abstract rights without tradition are a recipe for tyranny. In Yorkshire, factory owners read it by gaslight while their spindles spin cotton picked by enslaved hands in Georgia. The mistake of 212 AD scattered the empire into fragments. The Industrial Revolution welds the fragments into a global machine. Steam engines in Manchester, iron foundries in Liège, cotton mills in Lowell. Citizenship is now a wage packet, a 12-hour shift, a tenement room shared with 6 others. The mistake evolves into class. The citizen who owns the factory and the citizen who tends the loom are equal before the law, but not before the market. In Haiti, Toussaint Louverture, former slave, self-taught general, reads the Declaration of Rights by torchlight in a mountain camp and decides that liberty is not a French gift, but a universal demand. The mistake of 212 AD granted citizenship to provincials who remained slaves in all but name. The Haitian Revolution grants it to men who seize it with machetes. By 1804, the first Black Republic is born, and the French tricolor is replaced by a flag of blue and red with the white ripped out, the white of the master. The mistake repeats in reverse. Citizenship without assimilation, now enforced by Black emperors in a tropical palace built by forced labor. Picture a Viennese coffee house in 1793, where Beethoven sketches a symphony while news arrives of Louis XVI's execution. The mistake of 212 AD dissolved cultural cohesion. The Romantic movement resurrects it in music and poetry. Citizenship is no longer Roman law. It is the Volk, the nation, the imagined community bound by language and memory. German princelings dream of unity. Italian poets dream of risorgimento. Polish exiles dream of a third partition reversed. The mistake taught universality without identity. Nationalism teaches identity without universality. In London, the Royal Navy blockades French ports while William Wilberforce argues in Parliament for the abolition of the slave trade. The mistake of 212 AD included without liberating. The British Empire liberates without including. The Slave Trade Act of 1807 ends the traffic in human flesh across the Atlantic. But the cotton gins of Lancashire still spin the product of enslaved labor in Alabama. Citizenship is now a moral question. Who is inside the circle of rights, and who is outside? Let the rhythm of a steam engine lull you. In 1848, the year of revolutions, the mistake of 212 AD reaches its crescendo. Paris rises again, Louis-Philippe flees to England, and the Second Republic is proclaimed. The mistake evolves into suffrage. Every adult male citizen votes, and the assembly is a chaos of red caps and frock coats. In Vienna, students and workers storm the arsenal. Metternich, architect of the old order, escapes in a laundry basket. In Berlin, Frederick William IV promises a constitution and then retracts it. In Budapest, Lajos Kossuth declares independence. In Rome, Pius IX flees the Quirinal as Garibaldi's red shirts march in. The mistake taught inclusion without participation. 1848 demands participation without limits. The revolutions fail, crushed by Russian bayonets in Hungary, by French artillery in Rome, but the demand does not die. It goes underground, into manifestos and trade unions, into the quiet counting houses where Marx and Engels write that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. In the United States, the mistake of 212 AD is debated in blood. The Dred Scott decision of 1857 declares that no person of African descent can be a citizen. Abraham Lincoln in 1863 signs the Emancipation Proclamation and redefines citizenship as a moral absolute, a new birth of freedom. The mistake granted citizenship without humanity. The Civil War demands humanity without citizenship, and then, in the 14th Amendment, grants both. The mistake is corrected not by imperial edict, but by constitutional amendment, ratified in the ashes of Richmond. Picture a Parisian cafe in 1889, where the Eiffel Tower rises like a steel needle through the smog of the Belle Epoque. The mistake of 212 AD is now a museum piece. The Roman Empire is a chapter in school books. Its citizenship a curiosity beside the Code Napoleon and the German Civil Code. Citizenship is national, democratic, bureaucratic. It is a passport, a census form, a ballot. It is earned by birth, by naturalization, by service in the trenches that will soon open across Flanders. The mistake taught universality without community. The modern state teaches community without universality. The world is divided into nation-states, each claiming the loyalty Caracalla once claimed with a stroke of papyrus. As sleep finally claims you, hold the image of a child in a Roman playground in 212 AD, watching the imperial courier unroll the edict that makes him a citizen. Hold the image of a child in a Parisian playground in 1789, watching the tricolor rise over the Bastille. Hold the image of a child in a Berlin playground in 1989, watching the wall fall brick by brick. The mistake of 212 AD was not the granting of citizenship. It was the failure to demand anything in return. The modern world demands everything: language, loyalty, labor, blood. The empire that began with a gift ends with a contract signed in the ink of revolutions and the blood of wars. The fatal mistake did not destroy Rome. It taught the world what citizenship could be and what it must never be again. The crown sent east in 476 AD is now a constellation of crowns, parliaments, passports, and anthems. The boy who packed it into a box could never imagine the world it would birth. The mistake was made in a palace, sealed with wax, and carried to the ends of the earth. It did not end the story. It began the story of us,